Second half of Gentle Ben. Ellen said, "Mark, come here. Sit down and be quiet and listen carefully. You know the trouble that we're in with the whole town over Ben. They've demanded that we get rid of him or shoot him." "Not shoot him!" Mark cried. "We can't shoot Ben." "We won't have to if Arnie Nichols takes him out and turns him loose on an island. Don't you see? Ben will stay alive and free. Think what that means, Mark." "But I'll lose him," Mark cried. "Dad said he'd find another way." "This is the other way, but I can't lose Ben," he cried. "All right," his mother said. "You'd rather have him killed?" "No, no, no." "That's what the mayor and this town insist on, Mark. You were going to turn Ben loose to save his life. That's what we're doing now. Your father in Clearwater and Mr. Kelly are going to work most of the night building a cage for him." "But I don't want to lose him," he said forlornly. Ellen reached out and drew him close. "Ben's an animal," she said gently. "It's not right to keep him penned and chained all his life. If you do, you're not much better than Fog Benson. Oh, you fed him and took him to the creek a few times during the summer, but that's not being free. You've had him all summer and fall, and you've had a great time. Yours and Ben's has been a wonderful friendship, but now it's time to let him go. Now you can prove your love for Ben by turning him loose. Freedom is the greatest gift you can give him." "But some hunters might shoot him." "They might not, too. Lots of brownies die of old age. Remember, keeping Ben chained is not proving you love him. It's proving you're selfish for your own pleasure." Mark knew his mom was right. She was always right. But the hurt of losing Ben was almost more than he could bear. It was a little while before he could answer. Then he asked, "When will they take him away?" "You heard Mr. Nichols, tomorrow morning early." "All right," he said listlessly. Ellen kissed him. "You're growing up, darling. Would you like to go down to see the cage they're building?" "I'd rather go up and see Ben." "You won't try a foolish thing like you did this spring, will you?" Mark shook his head. "I just want to sit with Ben, Mom." They finished the cage that evening, and when Carl Anderson came home, he told Ellen, "Mark will have to lead Ben down to the dock and put him in the cage." "Can't someone else do that?" Ellen asked anxiously. "Mark's always led him before, and Ben goes along. We can't take chances going through town. Henry Beckett insists we have the rifle along just in case." The next morning when Ellen woke up Mark, it was still dark. Clearwater and his father were finishing their coffee when Mark came down the stairs. His mother said, "Do you have time for breakfast, dear?" Mark shook his head. "I'm not hungry, Mom." "All right, when you get back, perhaps put on your heavy coat and cap. It feels like it's going to snow." When he was ready, his mother put her arms around him and said, "Remember, you're not losing Ben. You're saving his life. You're giving him the most precious thing on earth, his freedom." "I know," Mark said, but all he could think was that in a few minutes he'd never see Ben again. When they went outside, Clearwater carried the rifle. The wind was cold and pushed against Mark with solid force. Clearwater said, "Winter's here for sure," and he pulled his beret down over his ears. Ben was awake, and Mark unfastened the chain and led him outside. There, Ben stopped, as he always did, and swung his big head right and left at his delicate nostrils, sampled the cold morning air. "Come on, Ben." Mark pulled on the chain. They went down the dark trail into town, Mark and his father in the lead, with Ben between them. Clearwater brought up the rear with the rifle. Ben padded beside Mark, only now and then stopping to sniff at a clump of dead grass or at the base of a stump. Because Orca City was built on a narrow ledge with the ocean on one side and the mountain rising steeply on the other, there were no back streets leading to the dock. They had to walk the full length of Main Street. The street was vacant, though, with only here and there a light in the store window. They passed down the center of the street. Ben moved along steadily with his pigeon-toed stride until they came to the northern fishery dock. Mike Kelly had the big floodlight on and was waiting. The cage, made of stout timber bolted together, stood at the edge of the dock. The drop door was open. The Hustler lay against the dock, her long boom slung out and hanging over the crate. Arnie Nichols leaned on the rail in the bow. His brother Sonny stood by the winch, ready to hoist the cage aboard. Mark stopped at sight of the cage, and his father said, "Come on, Mark. Get it over with. Let's not stretch this out. Put him in before he gets any notions." Mark looked up at his father. He looked at Mike Kelly standing quietly to one side. He looked at Clearwater. They were all waiting for him. There was no help anywhere. He led Ben up to the cage door, and there Ben stopped, sniffed the cage, stretched his big head forward, and looked inside. Here was something new. His curiosity was aroused. Anderson took the chain from Mark's hand. "Run around and back and coax him in, quick." Mark went around and knelt on the opposite side of the cage. He swallowed hard a couple times, then called, "Ben, come on, Ben." He stretched his hand through the bars, and Ben walked in and began sniffing at his fingers, looking for food. His father slammed down the door and snapped the padlock in place. "Unhook the chain," he said. Mark unfastened it, and his father pulled it out. Ben was held fast, but his attention was on Mark, and he didn't seem to realize he was in a cage. Mark scratched at the base of his ears, and Ben pressed against the bars, rolling his big head so Mark could scratch one ear, then the other. Mark started talking to him, his voice low and hurried. "You're going to be free now, Ben, really free. You won't have to sleep in any old shed anymore and eat the leftovers they throw out from restaurants and stores. You won't be chained ever again. You can be out in the sun all day if you want, and you can go any place you want to go. I don't want you to leave, but you have to because people don't understand you. I'll never forget you, Ben, never. I hope bears have good memories and you remember me for your life. Will you do that, Ben? Will you?" He scratched Ben under the chin one last time, and Ben stretched his big neck and closed his eyes and grunted like a pig. "Goodbye, Ben," the boy whispered brokenly. "Goodbye." He rose, turned savagely, and started blindly away. His father was suddenly beside him, an arm around his shoulders. "Son, I'm proud of you, really proud of you." Mark didn't understand what there was to be proud of. He had lost Ben forever. Clear to the harbor, the hustler punched into the wind and rising seas and began to roll. Inside the wheelhouse, Arnie Nichols said, "Sonny, did you lash that bear crate good and tight?" "I lashed her tight on the railing, Arnie. What island you going to put that bear ashore on?" "No island. We're going to Seattle. I know a guy down there that's got a little zoo along the highway. He's got a deer, a bobcat, a cougar, stuff like that. People stop to see the animals, and he sells them gas and postcards and things. He'll pay $500 for a full-grown brown bear." "But you said you'd turn him loose." "I had to. Anderson wouldn't have given him to me otherwise." "Suppose he finds out?" "He'll sure be mad." "How's he going to find out?" "Nobody knows but you and me." "But Arnie, what—" "Quit making a big thing of it. Look, Sonny, he's just a bear. What happens don't make no difference to him. Anderson didn't have no choice. He was in a jam. We took the bear off his hands, so he's satisfied. The bear ain't being killed, so he sure ought to be satisfied. To us, it's $500 for our trouble. That pays our way to Seattle with some left over. I say it was a good deal for everybody." "Well, I hadn't thought of it like that," Sonny said. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Arnie said. "You got to be sharper than the next guy to get along. You got to keep thinking all the time. You got to figure out the angles. Ain't you ever going to learn, Sonny?" Hour after hour, the hustler slammed into the sea. Ben crouched on the floor of the cage, worried and uneasy. He did not understand this whirly, rolling, tossing motion that would not let him even stand up. The sharp salt smell on the sea was strange. The constant throb of the motor, the slap of water against the hustler's sides were sounds he had never heard. He could feel the cage moved as it strained against the lashings at each roll. What he could not see was how the constant working of the cage was wearing the line thin where it was tied to the railing. A big sea, a heavy roll, and the line finally parted. With the next roll, the cage slid a foot, then was stopped by the line. On the following roll, the cage slid back a foot, and Ben's great weight behind it shot the cage forward and snapped the remaining lines. It was free on deck. The deck was spray-wet and slippery. Every motion of the hustler sent the cage sliding. Ben heard the men shout and saw them run toward the cage. The boat rolled, and the cage careened across the deck, scattering the men. It crashed into a steel winch and snapped two of the bars. Ben was on his feet now, frightened. Pushing against the broken bars, the boat rolled again. and the cage slid away from the wrench. The men ran with lines, shouting, trying to get the lines around the cage to snub it tight against the rail. Before they could tighten the lines, the cage jerked free, shot across the deck, and hit the winch, a mighty timber-shattering blow that caved in one whole side of the cage. Terrified, Ben shoved harder against the bars. He felt them give. He lunged forward, calling up all his tremendous strength. The bars bulged out. He got a paw through, and with a snapping and cracking of timbers, his big head and shoulders followed. Then the boat rolled again, dipping deep into a green trough. The cage sprang back across the deck at a new angle, with Ben's head and shoulders protruding. It struck the rail where it rose only a foot above the slippery deck, teetered an instant, then fell overboard into the sea. The two men leaned over the rail and looked down. Ben had squirmed out of the cage as it hit the water and was swimming strongly toward a not too distant island. Arnie Nichols waved his long arms in anger. "There goes $500. There goes our free trip to Seattle. I told you to lash that cage good and tight." "I did," Sonny yelled. "I lashed it tight as I could. You looked at it, Arnie." "All right," Arnie shouted. "All right." "Can't we get him back? We can catch up with him easy." "Well, how do we get him aboard? How do we hold him without a cage? He's a goner, along with $500. Arnie turned disgustedly back into the wheelhouse, started the engine, and brought the Hustler back on course. The swim to the island was not a long one, and Ben was an excellent swimmer. He made it easily. When he walked ashore, he stood on one of the largest brown bear islands in the Sound. The beach was flat, but a few hundred yards back, the land rose steeply into mountains that were now blanketed with snow. For a time, Ben wandered along the beach, deserted now by every creature but the seagulls. He was free for the first time in his life. To Ben, freedom meant only that there would be no Mark to take him back to his shed tonight. There would be no chain around his neck. He could go wherever he wanted. Many wild animals raised tame when turned loose to forage for themselves, die of starvation, or fall easy prey to the predators. Not so with Ben. No predator dared attack him. He was older than the days he had known and wiser than the years he had lived. Wisdom and strength from the earliest age of the mammals had been bred into Ben's mighty frame. He was a link to the ancient past and the centuries behind him, throbbed into life with a mighty beat that guided him as surely and firmly as if he had never known any life but that of the wild.